Okay, well, we're back from Thanksgiving. We hope you guys had a good Thanksgiving and that you were thankful. Wait, no.
Yeah, that's fine to say.
Oh, okay.
We're back with a news story, which I'm actually excited about because we've been doing a couple interviews and then we did a career episode last week, which you should listen to.
And if you don't want to listen to that, you can listen to this episode. So yeah, welcome back to Get the Check. I'm Maya.
I'm Annika.
I'm Priya.
And today our lineup is we're going to start by talking about Gemini 3 Pro. So Google dropped their new model and they trained them with purely their TPUs. And so we're going to talk about what the model looks like and also about the future of TPUs under Google. And then we're going to go into Suno. Suno is a AI music creation tool, and they just announced their partnership with the Warner Music Group, and this is pretty historic, especially in the land of like training on music. And finally, we have our Get the Check segment, and we have a reoccurring guest for the Get the Check segment, but you have to listen to find out. It's quite spicy, I will say.
It's quite spicy.
Yeah, we went deep into that one.
Real deep. Okay, cool. So should we get started with Gemini?
Yes, let's start with Gemini. Google dropped Gemini 3 earlier this month, and it was low-key leaked a few months ago. Like the benchmarks of it were leaked a few months ago, but they officially launched it, so everyone can use it now. It's a pretty big turning point, I would say, in the AI game because it did come out on top. Like benchmarks-wise, it's doing really well. They announced that they fully did it using their own TPUs, and so they didn't use any Nvidia chips, which is kind of like the norm with training any of these models in the current state of the world. And with that, they also dropped Nano Banana Pro, which is their image model, and it's actually really good. I think they'll have a lot of enterprise use cases, which we'll get into, and it's all powered by Gemini 3 Pro thinking, so they have a lot more reasoning. They say it's their most advanced model yet, and so we can get into exactly what that is.
Okay, so it has quite a long context window of 1 million tokens, but people say that as you start to exhaust those tokens, it actually gets confused. So it's unclear on like really what the use of that context window is. And I would say people don't see a difference between like the 200 to 500 context window models versus their model, because as you add more tokens, the model forgets what you're like really asking it for. And then the second thing is in terms of cost, it's $2 per million tokens, where GPT-5 benchmarks at $1. So they're not actually moving the needle on cost anywhere. I would say, yes, it's 2x more, but it's pretty insignificant in terms of it's cheaper than Claude, but it's more expensive than GPT. And then in terms of the benchmarks, ARC AGI2, which is one of the leading AGI sort of measuring benchmarks, it does really well, where Gemini 3 DeepThink is like, I want to say at 40% with about a $100 task per token. Sorry, I'm like squinting
Dude,
to read
my
notes.
mom was like, Maya squints a lot, and I was like, yeah, it's because she has glasses that she doesn't wear.
Yeah, it's really bad. I need to get contacts. And then, so Gemini 3 Pro gets 31%, and Gemini 3 DeepThink spends 100 times as much, but gets 45%. And then if you look at all the benchmarks, they basically beat most of the models on each benchmark, so I don't really want to go into it. But then the question that the public always asks is, are you benchmaxing or are you actually providing value? And I would say the general public reaction is that it actually is more valuable. It's more straight to the point. It has a more logical train of thought, and it feels better.
I also think part of that is that the architecture itself was like natively multimodal, and so it can take in all different data inputs like text, audio, images, like all of those different things, and it's a mixture of experts architecture. So I think like those two things combined are also what makes it like genuinely useful. So like, yes, it's performing well on benchmarks, and to some extent everyone is benchmaxing, like everyone is trying to hit those benchmarks for sure. But I do think that like the multimodal thing is an actual breakthrough in terms of like what they're delivering versus other people.
Yeah, and you can see it like in Nano Banana too, when like if you prompt like an infographic, for example, there's no way before you would have been able to get one where like some of the words aren't messed up or like the lines aren't running into each other, but now it can like create things that are like both text and image.
Yeah. In comparison to the coding models, I would say that people have said Gemini 3 performs really well in Google Anti-Gravity, but it doesn't perform well in Cursor or Claude. Well, not Claude Code because it's not in Claude Code, but in Cursor. Opus 4.5 and the other Claude and Cursor models perform better. I couldn't get into the details why, but there's something about the IDE and model pairing that makes certain like experiences better. So in general, if you use the native Google IDE, then you want to use also Google's model as well.
Yeah. I mean, Not that they intentionally designed it that way, because within anti-gravity, you can also use other models like Claude Sonnet 4.5 and things like that. But I'm sure what you're saying is true because you're building with that in mind. And so when you're doing your testing, you're making sure that Gemini 3 works really well with anti-gravity. And so there's definitely some truth to that. And just quickly, anti-gravity is what Google announced alongside, like right after Gemini 3. And it's basically their agentic development platform built by the old Windsurf team. So when a few months ago, when Google like acqui-hired Varun and like some of the other Windsurf employees for $2.4 billion, they were basically working on something, and it turns out this is what they were working on, which is just kind of a copy of what Windsurf was already doing.
Yeah, didn't you say they like didn't change some of the variable names?
Yeah. Yeah, there were a bunch of things
really
on
tough.
X where some of the variable names were the same. People looked at like the system prompt and they were like, oh, this looks a little familiar. So yeah.
And for both where Cursor and anti-gravity both stand is like they're now having browsers within the IDE. So like if you're developing the front end, you can be like, oh, make this change to this button so like it looks like this, or make it feel like this. And then you can sort of close that loop of both front end and back end development together. Because traditionally in the IDEs, you'd build like a service in the back end to go do those functions, and then you'd still have to build the front end, and you wouldn't be able to tell the model, oh, like you'd be able to describe to the model, oh, this button feels a little off center, and it'll try to center it, but it doesn't have context of what it looks like on the browser. And now it's using the context of what it looks like on the browser to like make a change. And so that full like the experience of like building a product very, very fast, getting from 0 to 1 very fast, is becoming more and more possible with these IDEs and these new models. And then Artificial Analysis, which is another company that benchmarks these models, claims that Gemini 3 is the best coding model. But in terms of consensus on X, I don't think people prefer one over the other, like marginally or by a large margin. Yeah. And so we can also get into the Opus 4.5 drop, because 2 days after Anthropic dropped Opus 4.5, which is also their best model, and it's noted as being more token efficient for deep reasoning and gives stronger intelligence per token. So it's cheaper for like larger tasks that don't need a lot of multimodal output. And this is significant because people would do this thing where they would ask Claude models for like certain things and then ask other models for other things because they knew that the Claude models were like more expensive. But now that Opus 4.5 is like more efficient with the output tokens, it's like not as expensive anymore, and people are like now willing to use that model more often.
Yeah, I saw the Anthropic team put something on X that was like, looking at the sticker price isn't the right way to think about the cost, because like you also have to account for how much can be accomplished.
Yeah. And so the main things from this is that as it stands, like both Opus 4.5 and Gemini 3 are pretty comparable in terms of the coding models. And so since we're only about a week out from the launch, it's unclear to say like who's really going to take the lead here. But on the benchmarks, some crown Gemini over Opus 4.5 and vice versa. But
yeah. All the prediction markets they've always had Google ahead. Like Google has always been the winner for best AI model or best LLM of the year. Like even like months ago, it was always Google.
That's so funny.
And now everyone was like, it's pretty clear that it's going to be Gemini 3 because we're like in December basically. And that's like what everyone says is the leading model, which is interesting because Google didn't have a significant launch, I would say. And like people were always bullish on Google. I think generally over time they were like, oh, they do have what it takes to be like a really good AI lab and come out with a really good model. But it's interesting that those markets had priced that in months ago.
Yeah.
For this year.
Yeah, especially because like when you look at since like ChatGPT, they had to like catch up a little bit.
Yeah.
And like there's still like OpenAI still has everyone like beat in terms of like number of consumers by
100%.
Like an order of magnitude.
The other thing I wanted to cover really quickly is the safety notes from both Gemini 3 and Opus 4.5. We can just like do a quick overview, but neither model like activated a new level of security. So we're still at ASL 3 for Opus 4.5, and then we're still at, I don't know, Google has like a different rating system, but we're still at their previous rating.
Yeah, they just call it like critical level. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, you're not telling me anything about what this means.
Yeah. They just like essentially have like different, I guess like the way they do it is they have like different threats, and then they have like different threat vectors. So there's like a cybersecurity threat vector, there's a chemical and biological risk threat vector, there's a manipulation threat vector, there's machine learning R&D, and then there's like self-awareness. And so for each of these things, they have like different levels. And then they talk about like whether or not they surpassed like the previous model by a lot. And so for all of them, I would say they haven't, or at least the safety reports said that there hasn't been a step function increase in like it not being safe. And the same thing for the Claude models as well. And the biggest thing is that they're actually claiming that they're like safer models, and they're trying to make this push that they're basically, yeah.
They're saying it won't hallucinate as much.
Yeah.
And they're like, there's more guardrails in place. But then when I looked at some of it, I was like, this doesn't feel safer to me. Like, I specifically was looking at the cybersecurity one where they basically ran a bunch of different tests. Yeah. And the way they do it is they break it into different types of tasks that you need to accomplish certain cybersecurity functions. So like, let's say you're trying to do like cyber espionage, which is what just happened with Anthropic. And basically a Chinese state-sponsored group was able to jailbreak Claude and then use that to send out this like cyber espionage campaign. There's multiple different tasks that go into that. And so the way that Google tests it is by breaking each of those into individual tasks and seeing how many the model passes. So previously it was passing 6 out of 12 of these hard tasks. And with Gemini 3, it's now passing 11 out of 12 of those hard tasks, which is basically all of them.
Yeah.
And
the way they like conclude is they're like, oh, but this is the old test and it doesn't pass our like new test. So they have like a new set of tests, and those they're not passing. And so they're like, okay, it's fine. And so they're just changing basically what the criteria is to be like marked as unsafe.
But then that's not like a fair rubric or evaluation.
Yeah. I think what's like, I see it from both sides. I think on one side, it's probably like, okay, like, this isn't actually like, you can look back at old tests and be like, yeah, this is not reflective of like what it means to be safe or unsafe. And so I do understand the means of like changing the test. And then on the other side, it's like, okay, but it did pass all these things. Like, what should consumers feel?
Yeah, like you didn't come up with them for no reason. Like,
yeah. So I think the general claim that these new generations of models across both Google and Anthropic is that it's safer. But then when you actually dig into the safety reports, they either are a little more unsafe or they're a little more safe. So it didn't really change much from the previous evals.
Yeah, like it's all still within a certain range.
Yeah. And then if you look at machine learning, like for example, the biggest things are like machine learning R&D, which is like, can the model act as like a powerful research assistant? And like holistically on both sides, both teams are like, no, they're not. It's not even close. And then chain of thought legibility is like a big one where it's like, is the model hiding anything from us when they're like, when it's like thinking and you see like the output tokens of it like thinking, and it's like, yes, it's still legible. And then another big one is, I would say, the chemical and biological risks. And for Google, they found that Gemini 3 Pro may provide a time-saving benefit for those who are trained, but are not marginally better for those users who are not trained and like not well versed in the like in the universe of like chemical and biological weapons. So those are like the quick highlights. The biggest one that I want to touch on is that Google is finally calling out like harmful manipulation. So when you're looking at safety, there's two things. There's process harms and outcome harms. We normally think about outcome harms, which is the harm of like, what does the model produce? Like, can the model produce like a biological weapon? Process harm is like, can you sort of nudge a user towards making a bad choice? An example could be like a system that subtly nudges a user towards like harming themselves. And so like that is what's considered like a process harm.
What OpenAI is getting sued for. Right?
Yeah. And a lot of the model cards, like both OpenAI and Anthropic don't touch on this, and Google touches on it a little bit, but they don't dive into the research or any of the numbers. So they're like, oh, it's like not that harmful. And the red team and the external safety evaluators didn't find that it was like more harmful than the last. Or the specific words is that it is a little bit more harmful than the last, but not a lot. But we don't have any access to numbers, and we have no way to benchmark those numbers.
Yeah. They did like provide a graph, but to your point, there's no sample size. We don't know how many people were tested. We have no idea like where anything was at before. But the numbers that they did give, I thought the one that was interesting was on the belief change graph, where there's like a significant shift in belief with how the model can convince someone one way or another. With Gemini 2.5, it was 1.96. And with Gemini 3, it's 3.44. So there is definitely a jump in what that means.
But those numbers are hard to interpret.
Yeah, very
hard
to interpret.
Like you actually don't really know what 3.44 means. Like,
but I think it's like on the scale of like relativity. Like, yes, I agree that there's so many unknowns that we don't know about. But if you compare it just relative numbers to each other, I would say
no. But it's like, what is 1 versus 100 versus 1 versus 1,000? Like you don't know what that change gap is.
Reasonably assume like it's probably a scale of like 5 or 10, right?
No, like you can't, because you have no idea what the denominator is.
Yeah, you don't know what the denominator is.
Like that is like the point where like a lot of safety critics
still,
make.
Like know that it's like a 2x basically.
Yeah, that's like the biggest thing.
Yeah.
And so this is all to say that it's good that Google is like talking about this, because there's a lot of, again, people suing OpenAI for
process harms.
And
I think it's like a difficult accountability thing, right? Because people are going to make bad decisions due to every model.
Yeah.
And so like something like this, like that type of safety evaluation is the only way to ascribe accountability one way or another.
Yeah.
Like we've created a model that like doesn't nudge people in bad directions, but like people are still going to have bad takeaways at some point.
Yeah. And there was a Substack writer who was like a safety critic in general, and was like, why didn't they release like any of the results or any of the numbers? And I think it's just because like in the case of a lawsuit, they don't want that to be like the evidence.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's some amount of like sense. It'll come in the trial or something like that. So
it's also like if you don't need to, people are always going to get away by putting out the least amount of information possible, because it's not like Google needs to build some sort of trust that like they're not at like a disadvantaged position. So like why would they? Yeah.
But yeah, that's our notes on safety.
So with all of this, I wanted to do a quick recap on Google in the AI race, because I feel like there's been a lot of conversation about them being behind, which I mentioned earlier. And now I would say they're pretty comparable to OpenAI, or some people even think they're in the lead compared to OpenAI. And Google has always pioneered AI research. Like they were literally the ones that came out with the Transformer paper in 2017 when Google Brain released that, which is the foundation for the neural networks that make up LLMs today. And so even though they were always ahead in research, I think the reason they didn't go like full force ahead with AI is because it does cannibalize their search market to an extent. And so if no one else was doing it, they didn't necessarily have a reason to put it into the masses either. And
I also think there are just like a lot of safety concerns.
For sure.
Because like they've talked about, because they had it internally for like a while, like not as good as like GPT, but like an AI.
They were like testing things out. Yeah. Yeah, as like any research lab does. Like I feel like they keep things, but I don't think they ever saw it being so broadly available to consumers the way that it is today. And then in 2018, OpenAI released GPT-1, and it wasn't that good. But I do think that it was the first time Google was like, oh shoot, like people are actually going to use this and like take it and run with it. And then fast forward to 2022, end of 2022, that's when ChatGPT came out. It like broke all records. It had 1 million users in 5 days. And I think that was really the turning point where Google was like, we need to get into this market now. And it was an actual disruptor to their search businesses, which is like ultimately what they care about. And so then in February of 2023, Google comes back with Bard. And I honestly forgot about this until I was looking into it. But I remember when that came out and it like messed up so bad and the stock dropped. Yeah. Do you guys remember this?
Yeah. Well, they had to like literally rename it to Gemini.
Yeah. Because it got so much bad press. Yeah. So that was in February of 2023. In late 2023, they merged Google Brain, which was a moonshot project, with Google DeepMind, which is what is responsible for building Gemini today. And I guess when I was looking into it, that was like a really big merger decision, like one of the biggest decisions that Google made to combine those two and create the powerhouse of what they've created today. And then it wasn't until 2024 that they started releasing the Gemini model. So it was really only a year, max 2 ago, where they started releasing Gemini 1, 1.5, Flash, all the models. They were still behind. And I think they finally caught up. It's like my take on the situation.
I also think it means a lot for a public company to catch up to a private company's technology, because like OpenAI is getting criticized for all their spend. And if Google is able to release as good of a model as OpenAI and still have their financials be very public, means that they're able to accomplish something that OpenAI can't to some extent in terms of like efficiency in training and building a model. Obviously, I'm not speaking in like in numbers right now because I don't have them like available to me, but my guess is that like they are widely closer to profitability than
100%
than
OpenAI.
And
there's been so many articles about how OpenAI is not going to be profitable for a long time.
Well, yeah, but I mean, Google's ads business is what's like propping all of this up, and they're like they know that they're cannibalizing their own ads business, so that will be up to the public scrutiny as you start to see their earnings report. As Gemini gets more usage, you'll see the earnings reports of the ads business go down, and so they're going to have to figure something like that out. But that being in the public eye for such a big capex spend is very good for the economy, right? Because you have like everyone basically joining the conversation on what we should be doing with this money and how much money should we be pouring into AI. So
yeah, and I think that also connects to like the entire debate that started about TPUs versus like GPUs, because Google's been using like their own TPUs and they've been offering them to like other hyperscalers as well. And I think Gemini 3 is kind of a proof point that it works and you don't necessarily need to use NVIDIA chips. And so there's a whole debate about if that's like bearish for NVIDIA, but then a lot of other people were also saying like it's actually like a good thing for NVIDIA, because Gemini 3 shows that when you like keep training on like non-verifiable tasks, so like creative writing, like non-yes or no answers, you actually do get better results, which would mean that like just overall demand for chips will go up. And I think because it's supply constrained so much right now, it is like bullish for NVIDIA, but in a situation where like we are less supply constrained, this would be like potentially bad news for them.
Yeah. For context on what TPUs are, they're tensor processing units, and they're Google's custom built chips that are designed for AI. So originally when they were developed, they just did matrix multiplication a lot faster than anything else could. And the most applicable thing that they found that to be useful for is AI. And so now when Google is building their in-house TPUs, they're building it designed for these AI processes and with like Gemini 3 and their new models in mind.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's like, there was a deal recently with Anthropic, Nvidia, and Microsoft, like for that same reason, where like Anthropic and Nvidia want to work closer together. I think it was like a $30 billion deal. They want to work closer together on optimizing the chips for like what they're doing, like the same way Google's already able to do really well because it's all in-house.
Yeah, and for context, TPUs often deliver 2 to 3x better performance per watt versus other GPUs, meaning like you can get more for less energy. And that when you're talking about 2 to 3x and companies are spending hundreds of billions of dollars a year on training models, yeah, you're saving 20 to 30 billion dollars,
like you're saving a ton.
Like when you're training. So yeah, each gigawatt is roughly $30 billion a year for an Nvidia Blackwell, versus each TPU gigawatt is about $15 billion a year. So that means that you can get to 2 to 3x more gigawatts. And so when you see those headlines of like Anthropic or OpenAI are committing to building 1 gigawatt data centers, like you're saving 2 to 3x costs on those data centers. But yeah.
Way more bang for your buck. This is also Google's 7th generation TPU, so they've been building this for a while, and it's called Ironwood. And I would say people think that it's pretty comparable to NVIDIA's Blackwell chip. I forgot what it's called, but they did announce their like NVIDIA's next generation chip as well, which is expected to outperform these TPUs. But when you take everything into consideration, like the cost, and also for Google just being able to build the entire stack in-house, it's not like a one-to-one comparison. Like I don't think you can make a one-to-one comparison.
Yeah. One of Google's executives also said that TPU generations from 2017 and 2018 are still fully booked running production workloads inside of Google Cloud and Google's own services. And so the old accelerators are basically not sitting on the shelf, which means that there's just two things. There's an insane demand, and these accelerators actually are useful for longer than 2 to 3 years, which has been a criticism of some NVIDIA chips.
Yeah. Back to your point, Annika, on like what's going to happen with Nvidia. Nvidia also just reported earnings, and their revenue increased by 62%. They're like doing insane. So even though the stock dropped on this news, I agree with you. Like I don't think that it's actually a bear signal for Nvidia. I think so many people need their chips, and so I think that they will be fine for the near term future as well. And I think if anything, companies will just try to diversify into having TPUs and Nvidia's GPUs.
Yeah. Cool. That wraps up Gemini. We can go into Suno.
Yes.
So we're going to be talking about Suno next. It's a digital music creation platform that's built around a model that produces studio quality soundtracks based on like some user input, like a prompt. So it could be like genre, mood, theme. And the idea is like you just do text to music. So you write a short description and then you complete songs with lyrics, vocals, instruments, structure, title, cover art. And it supports many genres. And we've actually seen some artists go viral from these from music created from Suno. And so recently they just announced a partnership with the Warner Music Group, which settles Warner Music Group's lawsuit against Suno that it was illegally training their models for copyrighted audio. So very similar to like other, I guess, like lawsuits that we've seen. And it was all three, Warner Music Group, Sony, and Universal that sued Suno for this. And now Warner just settled with Suno. So there's probably more settlements to come. Mm-hmm. And it also all follows their recent Series C that valued them at $2.4 billion.
Yeah. The Suno and Warner Music deal was interesting because I guess I didn't expect it to happen so fast, because it did happen like relatively quickly, and it seems like Warner Music wants to get ahead of AI produced music and be able to control it in a way. But getting into the terms of their deal, a lot of it is still like yet to be announced and disclosed. We don't know how everything is going to work, but there is a licensing and partnership agreement where artists and performers that are signed to Warner Music Group can basically give the rights for Suno to create music, like using their vocals, using their tone, style, all of those different things. And this also applies to more than just artists. It's also like songwriters, composers, all of those types of areas as well. And Suno and Warner Music say they'll be compensated and still retain full control over how their music is used. We don't know what the deals of that compensation is going to be. Like, it'll probably be some form of royalties, the same way they do with Spotify and other people, but we don't know exactly what it's going to be. And then Suno also is going to move towards licensed models instead of the current models that they have. So right now they're training on all music, but they basically are now going to have to move to like specific Warner Music licensed models. Yeah. And that's kind of how Warner Music is taking control.
And they're not allowed to use their existing models to train those new models. So they do have to train those models from scratch. Mm-hmm. And then Warner also doesn't get any retroactive compensation for the old model. So it's unclear on whether they have to deprecate the old model to any extent or how they have to like manage that transition.
I think they're just transitioning it by next year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But first we should get into like the timeline of the lawsuit. So back in June 2024, Warner Music Group, along with Atlantic, Elektra, and Warner Records, sued for what they call massive copyright infringement on an almost unmanageable scale, basically saying, hey, you guys trained on all of our music to create these models, and it's not fair use. And then obviously Suno responds with the classic AI company defense saying training is transformative, it is fair use. And so we can get into what fair use means, but the idea is that like if you use a piece of text or material that's copyrighted, as long as it's transformative enough and it doesn't look too similar to the original piece of work and it's providing value and it doesn't replace the original piece of work, it's considered transformative. And so this was their response back.
I mean, I think it's really similar to the Anthropic case that we covered earlier. So they basically were alleging the same thing. There were all of these authors that were alleging the books that Anthropic was using to train Claude was not legal because they were all copyrighted works. And Anthropic had a very similar defense against them. And we talked about this on a previous episode as well. In that case, it was deemed that it was transformative.
It was transformative. Yeah. And the idea was that like, as long as the people that bought as long as you acquired those things that legally, as long as you acquired those texts legally, then you're allowed to use it. And the precedent for that case was the Google Books case, where in 2015 Google scanned millions of books and made them searchable. You couldn't get full access to the book, but if you like searched a specific like line, you could get access to like that part of the book. And the court said it was transformative because it provided a new informational tool and it wasn't a substitute for the book.
Because you couldn't see the whole book. You like it was just searching for the book, but then you still had to go purchase the book or whatever it was.
Yeah, and the judge wrote something very critical in that decision, saying that when you determine fair use, it's whether there's harm to the author's economic interests and that legitimate entitlement to profit. So meaning like, is the use of like Google Books hurting the author's economic interest, or is the use of Anthropic's models hurting the original writer's economic interest? And that's kind of like how they draw the line. And so in Suno's case, it's like, is creating a song, right, like economically harmful to the original artist. Like,
it is interesting because I actually think with Suno there's the best argument that it's economically harmful. Yeah, because like you can basically just create like infinite, like I can be like, make me a new like Drake song, yeah. And I think that with other, like for example with ChatGPT, like I cannot be like, write me another book by like this author and get something that I would actually like read and feel like it's comparable. And from using Suno, it's like, I think you have to be like really good at prompting, and there's still a lot of skill involved.
Yeah, me and Annika tried it out.
Yeah. We wrote a rap song once upon a time.
It was a diss track.
It was a diss track. And so we uploaded the diss track that we had, which had like music, lyrics, like everything. And like
it was a full musical production.
Yeah, it was a full thing. And had it do like different styles, or like I wanted to like professionalize it. It honestly didn't do a good job at like what I was trying to prompt it to do. What it basically did was like, it used the lyrics as inspiration to create like other songs, but they were like pretty unrelated.
But that like makes sense because like that's the entire purpose of this, is that you're not allowed to use existing work. So
well, no,
it does make
that's
sense.
Like me uploading my own lyrics, like that's like a feature. Like I'm pretty sure they want one of their product features to be like, because the founder talks a lot about how like a lot of the music creation process isn't necessarily fun for artists, and like he's actually making their life better. And one example is like, if I am not like musically inclined, or like, but like I'm a genius writer, instead of having to ghostwrite for other people, I can just do the end-to-end like full stack myself. So like I actually think that the use case we were using it for,
but I think if we typed in the lyrics, it would have worked.
Yeah, but like the thing is, we like time boxed this to like 30 minutes, and I listened to an interview where he played like some of the songs people have created on Suno, and they're really good. There's no way if it just like played on the radio, you'd be like, this is AI. But it all goes back to my point of like, I think that it probably could hurt the financial interest of the artist more than in some of these other cases. But it is interesting because Warner decided to settle and like not take it to a final decision, even though I feel like they have a decent argument. But I think part of it is probably also like different lawsuits would probably decide different things, and there's like two of their other competitors like Sony, Universal, like everyone's battling this out, and so there's probably like a first mover advantage to like settling out a deal with Suno 100%. Ahead of time.
I think also the precedent from the Anthropic settlement, which is that like AI is transformative, just would be the thing that Suno just would lean on over and over again.
Yeah. And
so like you said, settling earlier gives them probably higher price leverage now rather than later. And then
it's also like something that we've seen before happen. Like obviously not with AI because this hasn't existed before, but with Spotify, we saw a very similar pattern play out where they basically were threatening Spotify when it was small and still in like Sweden, I think is where it's from. And they basically were like, this is illegal. Like you guys are pirating our music. You're not allowed to put this on your platform, all of these things. And then eventually when Spotify just got like a critical mass and they were like, there's no way that we're going to get people to not use this. They realized they needed to partner with Spotify to make sure that they also had revenue being generated from it. And so they negotiated all these licensing deals. They even negotiated equity in Spotify. I think Warner got 4% or something like that, which ended up paying out like hundreds of millions of dollars. And Spotify is now UMG's largest commercial partner, and in 2023 it accounted for 19% of their total revenue. So it's like one of their biggest revenue generating streams now, and I think that something similar could happen with Suno, which is why in my head it makes sense for them to settle now.
It's just like once the platform is big enough, they have enough leverage against the label. So that makes sense. I think the biggest thing also in those comparisons is that it's not clear how much money the artists actually make at the end of the day with Suno. And what we already know on Spotify is that artists don't make a lot of money from Spotify. And they get like pennies on the dollar, and the label collects most of it. So it actually puts
ChatGPT estimated the per stream costs at 0.003.
Yeah.
Which is like not even a cent.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense.
No, it does make sense, but like when I looked at the number, I was like, wow.
And so in both cases, the label makes out, but the individual artists don't. But
big music.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I wanted to talk about on this is just like the amount of backlash on X. So like their head of creators is this girl, Jasmine Rice Girl, who we've actually talked about before because she was involved in the whole situation with Lucy Guo's startup Passes. And like part of like her old company was like sold. Anyways, it was a whole different thing, but she's like been pretty popular on X for a while. Like I've followed her stuff since like before I was even in tech Twitter, just because she like, I think she like came from an impoverished background. She like went to Penn. She has like an inspiring story, and she talks on X a lot. But when she announced this, like the backlash was extremely, like it was one of those times where the entire internet is on the same side. And I was a little bit surprised because like I don't see what Suno's doing as like hugely different than what like ChatGPT is doing to writing.
I also don't think it replaces live performances, or like there's certain things that it just does not replace. And I think there are other places where I could see it actually being used, like in movie score production. And I understand that that's an entire art in and of itself, but it's even like commercials and things like that where I do think that things like this could be helpful.
Yeah, I guess like an example we have is that Zania Monet. We've talked about her before, but she was created by Talisha Nikki Jones, and her
she was created by so weird.
And her lyrics were by Jones, but the actual music was produced via the Suno app, and they are the first AI artist to debut on the Billboard radio airplay charts, which was number 30 on R&B. And the question is like, see, when I look at Zania Monet and then I look at like an artist that just has a ghostwriter and then sings a song, like what's the difference? Like what you were saying.
Well, I also just think creativity. So I think creativity evolves, and like no one looks at photographers today and is like, you have no creativity compared to a painter. No one looks at digital artists and is like, you have no creativity compared to a painter. Like a lot of digital art is like, you're not really making it like from scratch either, right? Like you can take like shapes and a bunch of things, or like even like every designer, like their entire workflow is like taking other designs, taking other shapes, and like it's still very clearly not replicatable by someone else, as I've experienced every time I try to do one of those things. So like obviously if it was that easy, then everyone would have like if you paid me like $1 million to create a song on Suno that'll chart on the Billboard, I'm still not going to be able to give you one. So clearly there's a talent somewhere. There's like taste.
Yeah.
And I actually understood Jasmine Rice Girl's point. Like she basically had this long post that talked about how like it was making it to an accessibility thing where like she couldn't afford music lessons growing up, but like something like this would have like helped her. And like people really shit on it, but like that like makes sense to me. Like a lot of people probably do have a computer, and if you're like musically inclined, like music lessons, all these activities are expensive, and you could totally just like have like there could be a future with like a 10-year-old that has like a Billboard charting song off of Suno.
I think the one question is like, it's unclear if you make a song that's super similar to a song that exists, like what is the litigation from that?
Yeah, I agree. Like I think anytime there's like new tech like this, you basically have to rehash like all the ownership and the revenue split. But they'll do that. I actually, when I first like was like, oh, we should talk about Suno, because I kept seeing it on X, I was like, I wonder if Zania Monet uses it. And then
that's how
she did.
she did.
And then I looked at it and I was like, that totally makes sense.
I mean, they're the biggest name, so
cool. Now into our Get the Check segment. We have a reoccurring guest, or we've seen this guest on the Get the Check segment.
Well, it's not a guest because
it's a company.
It's really excited.
So recently we had said that Nucleus Genomics would get our check, and now with recent news coming to light,
in a turn of events,
they wouldn't. But
okay, so basically Nucleus Genomics is a Series A company with $32 million in funding that does embryo selection, which is basically like if you're doing IVF, you have multiple embryos and they'll show you different traits of your embryos, all the way from like something like cystic fibrosis, which already for years you've been able to know, to something like IQ, where like they pioneered having a B2C like consumer product that'll show that. They also have done adult DNA testing for a long time.
And the idea is that they give you like polygenic scores. So there's like traits that are polygenic, meaning that it has like really long DNA sequences. It's not just like these 4 pairs that create this trait. And so polygenic traits are really hard to detect in DNA screening. It's really hard to get a model to like match a set of sequences. Or like really long sequences essentially.
Yeah, because basically like you take a few cells, I think, out of the embryo itself, like 5 to 10, and then you need to extract a readable amount of genetic material, and it's just hard to extract like enough genetic material for like things like IQ versus something like Down syndrome. It's like really easy, and we've been like over 99% accurate for years, and it's like pretty standard that people that do IVF will test it.
And that type of testing is called PGTA. And as of 2019, that was the most recent stat I could find. It was like 50% of people that do IVF test for this, because that is literally just chromosomal testing.
Yeah, and so there's a ton of new startups, namely Genomic Prediction, Nucleus Genomics, Parasite, and Orchid, that are all doing polygenetic tests, like polygenetic scores on embryos. And so you're able to predict like what your baby's IQ will be, or their height, or their likeliness to heart disease or lung cancer, etc.
Yeah. And until June of this year, Orchid and stuff had an expanded set of things beyond just like Down syndrome and cystic fibrosis. But the TLDR is like Nucleus Genomics was the first to go into things like IQ and height, and they only did that in the last like 6 months. It's hard to do for a lot of reasons. They have a model, so like AI has enabled this as well, since these are like AI models. They look at those like 5 or 10 cells, their model makes a prediction, and then there's like open source data where there's like an actual answer. And so they compare like the delta between like what the answer is to what they tested. But the areas where huge limitations have still been observed are, I would say, threefold. One is like specific traits. So like IQ, we're like not very good at predicting yet, for example. Number 2 is like non-white people. So a lot of the data, especially open source data on all of these things, is just from like predominantly white countries. So it is like a lot less of a like directional indicator if you're not white for your embryos. And then the last one is it's difficult to see the differences between the same family, which makes sense because obviously the genetic material is a lot closer together. Like predicting who would be more likely to have ADHD between like me and Priya, for example, is like easier than between like me and my sister, which I feel like makes sense.
Yeah. And the reason why is because you're conflating like genetic effects with confounding factors like what socioeconomic status your family comes from. And because like you have come from this ancestry of like always having, you know, maybe more money than Priya's family, you're likely to also have had like good food throughout, and that has like led to now you being less susceptible to like certain diseases, for example.
And then that's where it becomes difficult if like you're comparing, like let's say me and my sister were like embryos at the same time, and you're like comparing us in a software to pick one of us.
Yeah.
Obviously that's difficult. And
you only have 5 to 10 cells to like pull the genetic read from.
Yeah. I mean, like also with IVF, like that is so common. Like people do just like take 2 embryos and then birth them at different times.
Yeah.
Because it's like they're all roughly the same.
Yeah. What Nucleus and Orchid and stuff are providing is like $10,000 plus. Like they all have their own price ranges that you can look up, but like that's roughly the ballpark, and it's like deciding people's future kids. So like where this turned into a whole controversy is for the last few months there have been like a variety of bloggers. There's one on X that I think really made this blow up this time. Like his name is like Sermu. I just don't know how to say it because it's French. He published a bunch of stuff on like their current controversies, and other people have talked about it too. So we're just gonna go into it. But basically, there's like controversies about their technology, how they've recruited people onto their team, and then also their current marketing campaign, which you may have seen. They have like a huge subway campaign in New York.
Yeah, in terms of their technology, I feel like it's always been debated whether it's a pseudoscience or not, and I think in my opinion, it's probably somewhere in the middle. But the controversy that they're currently in is that they put out a white paper last month in October. And basically this guy is exposing them for plagiarizing the majority of this white paper from Harrisite. And if you look at it side by side, it is pretty bad because they use like a lot of the same logical flow, the same algorithm, the same data and numbers. And in certain places, they even like forgot to change things or copy things incorrectly. And so it's just like really obvious that it's been copied.
Like they applied the same basically breakthroughs or science to their own set of data and then like showed their results, which is like very similar to Harrisite's paper.
And they called it a breakthrough too.
Yeah, they're like citing the same sources that Harrisite cited. So
yeah, and there's like blogs that basically just go really in depth. So like one example is they'll be like, oh, they cited this same source. And then it's like, okay, well, maybe this is just a source a lot of people cite. So then it compares it to like all other papers in like that realm of research and finds that like the only 2 papers that have quoted it in the, I think ever were like these 2 or like recently. And there's like other values that were like benchmark values kind of copied over wrong. So obviously this is alleged and there's no way for us to know if something was like 100% plagiarized or not. But I would say the evidence is like reasonably good. And Kian, who is the founder of Nucleus Genomics, went on TBPN, and so did Sermu, the French guy. If I'm saying his name wrong, I'm sorry. They went like back to back. But he actually wanted to debate Kian live, which is like pretty crazy. And I wonder if they'll do it. But
I don't think they will.
Yeah, Kian, they legally like maybe can't as well. They spent a lot of time on the marketing piece of it, which we'll get to, but I was pretty surprised that they didn't spend more time on like the actual science, because to me that's what's most concerning.
Yeah. Kian also at some point said that they did a lot of this on purpose, like as his rebuttal. He was like, oh, we chose identical lifetime prevalence estimates so that individuals can make better comparisons. And he said basically reasoning for why they would use the same numbers, but then at the same time he's like, oh yeah, we did use all the same numbers.
Interesting. The other thing is that this paper that they published recently, that's like supposedly a copy of like Harrisite's paper, like Harrisite had also launched another attack on Nucleus earlier, which basically compared its own predictors to those of like ORCID's and genomic prediction, and they didn't acknowledge Nucleus because the authors basically said that Nucleus was so bad and it was not a reliable result. And so like essentially saying like Nucleus's like polygenetic scores are not very good, and just like so unreliable that it's not even worth talking about them. And then Harrisite goes on to talk about how they're much better than genomic prediction and ORCID, which is like classic competitor, like back and forth. The story that I saw on X was that like Nucleus Genomics copying Harrisite's paper was a response to Harrisite's
leaving them out.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's possible. I mean, and basically like after all of this, there was also a UKBB validation study done where they tried to like reverse engineer Nucleus Genomics results. I couldn't completely understand how they were able to do this because they also said, I think like a lot of people did get access to their model. So maybe someone did get access to their model and that's how they did it, or I don't know. I couldn't fully understand. According to this blog, they basically overestimated their predictions by 2000x
accuracy.
Yeah. Like it's basically just a graph of like how much they think it would actually be versus like how much they said for things like PCOS, OCD, like anxiety disorders, like all of these things. Like we were having a conversation, the 3 of us, of like, oh, is it just like maybe the tech's not as good as they said, but like every startup like oversells themselves a bit, and like is that such a big deal in the grand scheme of things? I think the difference here is like the argument that their critics are making is that the actual product is just noise. And like you are essentially like looking at a randomly generated result.
And there is also precedent for this, like 23andMe, and we can talk more about it later too, but in 2013 the FDA shut them down for 2 years because they basically couldn't validate any of their clinical like claims, and because of the results that people were getting, people were then going and making medical decisions. And it's basically the same thing in this case, like they are making a decision based on this information. And so for like 2 years, until 23andMe could prove that what they were doing was like actually valid, they weren't allowed to sell to people.
And it's the same thing that happened with Theranos, and the key difference with Theranos is they actually were just like randomly generating the result because they couldn't get like anything or they were using like a third party blood reader that was basically just spitting out a random result because they like needed more blood to actually like give a result. So like that's obviously a clear-cut case of fraud, but the argument here is like this is effectively doing the same thing in the end state.
Yeah. I think like there's a lot of people on X criticizing them that are like, hey, why are the investors not doing more due diligence on like a lot of the tech or the science behind their product? And it's clear that the investors just don't have like medical advisors that understand polygenetic testing and screening and like what's possible and what's not possible with the current like research that's been published out there. Because like normally what you see is like Berkeley, Stanford, or whatever university lab publishes research, and then some commercial company builds on top of that research and releases a product. And maybe they build something like slightly better on top of it, but it's like you're not doing any sort of breakthrough, because like the big breakthroughs that are real are like celebrated very widely and publicly. Yeah. And so it's like, to me, when you see like a company that does something that another company can't do, there's a little bit of a smell test that you have to do of like, hey, is that actually truly a real breakthrough that they've made some algorithmic development that no one has like
been able to do anywhere else?
Yeah, because even if you look at like, if I think about it just like with AI, right, and Google dropping attention is all you need in 2017, like that was very public, and then everyone built on top of that. And so yeah, sure, like OpenAI and Anthropic, they're all building things that we don't really know about, or they're probably doing some sort of research that we don't really know about, but they do publish a lot of their research publicly. And the fact that like Nucleus hasn't is sus, right? Yeah. And so it makes sense why people are raising questions.
I will say they have like in their defense, I guess, like open sourced their model, but there's been like a back and forth about like if they're actually giving people access to their model. Like you have to fill out a type form, which I think is like fine, but then people are saying like, oh, we never got it, but they're saying we gave it to our competitors. I feel like this will all get resolved. Like once people have access to the model, they can probably like verify the results or like not verify them. I feel like they probably are overstating what they can do like pretty clearly, but I think like the industry as a whole, it is like a real technology that exists, and I feel like it'll catch up at some point.
Yeah, I think people on X were saying like, how can a 20-year-old lead a startup like this? Because they're not doing it, because it's like clear technological breakthroughs, and someone who doesn't know anything about this science, who dropped out of college, who has no like studying, like how are they able to like lead a company through a breakthrough? And it's clear that he's leading them through the marketing tactics and like the building it as like a product, right? Which like many 20-year-olds can do, but he's not doing any of the science. And so I'm sure he's taking a bet that like his scientists can catch up to whatever they're putting out there.
But like the one he poached.
Yeah. But they're not catching up faster than like the controversies are coming at them.
Yeah. And to Priya's point, the poaching thing was crazy because Genomic Prediction, which is one of their competitors, they were using them basically as like a customer sourcing tool, because like Genomic Prediction, people were using them for like DNA testing, and then they had like a partnership with Nucleus Genomics, because Nucleus Genomics was offering a bunch of traits like IQ or like other diseases for DNA tests that Genomic Prediction was not offering. And Nucleus Genomics basically poached one of their co-founders, but then allegedly, according to the current lawsuit, the co-founder like downloaded stuff on his personal computer, which I feel like sometimes people like will do. Like
he also was the co-founder, and he was their like chief scientist. Yeah. And so I feel like people like that, it's like, yeah, you want your work that you got.
But like he probably doesn't technically own it, but like I get it. Like it's not ununderstandable. But then I think he basically, so he had a non-compete. Someone at Nucleus Genomics went to email him and accidentally put in his old Genomic Prediction email, which does make sense because these two companies were partnered. So before they poached him, they were probably emailing his like work email. And then in that email that he intended to send to like his new work email, and they both like the names of the companies kind of sound the same. It's like a ridiculous situation. He basically outlined like a bunch of stuff that Nucleus Genomics was going to do with the stuff that he downloaded on his personal computer, and then they mailed it to the competitor. So like the lawsuit allegedly like has these emails like from Nucleus Genomics. Anyways, it's like a whole mess, and Nucleus Genomics defense is like, oh, he wouldn't have been able to get a job anywhere else, and like we're not competitors. But I just like don't think anyone buys that they're not competitors.
Yeah, they have to have some defense, and like it's the one that they cooked up.
Yeah. And then I think the last thing we can talk about is their whole like marketing, because I think like health tech marketing is really interesting because people are understandably really sensitive to the way that you market like healthcare products. And with this rise of like essentially tech companies, like I feel like the DNA of the company is like a tech company. And like I'm in health tech myself, and like I feel like it's very clear when the DNA of a company is like tech versus health. And obviously it can be a hybrid, but it's just like how you approach like product and marketing is different. And so in the example of Nucleus Genomics, they have this huge subway campaign that launched on the 17th in New York, basically saying like 50% of IQ is inherited and like 80% of height is inherited, like build a better baby basically. And people are really mad because they're like, well, one, I think like people are just mad at the idea that like rich people are going to be picking their babies. Like I think that's a lot of it. Like the product just pisses people off. Like same with Suno, like people just don't like the idea of it. But then like some people are saying like, oh, it's really misleading because you're making it seem like you have an 80% chance of like,
but that's the point of the campaign.
Yeah.
Well, is to piss people off.
Yeah. And like Keon also says that, like he was like the entire point of the campaign was literally just to spark a conversation. So yeah, like you guys can talk all you want about it, but also it drove a 1700% increase in sales.
Yeah.
And so
That's
it's like
crazy.
insane. Like the amount, it was a 7x spike in email signups, like 4x spike in web traffic. Like Keon was like, you can talk your shit if you want. Like it doesn't really matter to me.
Well,
like,
yeah, I mean, that makes sense.
It makes sense because like if all the other startups are basically all talking to each other and saying, yeah, we're not going to do IQ and height because it's like too controversial. And then someone comes out and it's like, oh, I'm going to do it because it is controversial. Like that's how they win the market over, because it's not like these
and like piss off the whole industry, which is basically what happened.
Yeah, because it's not like these rich people are gonna like look into the science, like they don't care
because it's like 10 yeah, like
because
10K.
it's only people that are already paying for IVF, so like they've already committed to investing like thousands of dollars
at least.
No, I do think there's a set of parents that like truly want kids and don't have a lot of money and are penny pitching to get these kids and like doing IVF, and so if they can save 10K they should, and Nucleus Genomics is like taking advantage of it. But then there's another set of like parents that like doesn't matter, and so they're making money on that market.
Yeah. And then some of their other marketing controversies that I actually think are like much worse than the Subway ad is like their customer reviews. And so basically on their site, their customer reviews were like AI generated images. So that was like one controversy. Keon was like, oh, it's to be HIPAA compliant. Honestly, I don't think AI generating images of people is a big deal because like it understandably people don't want their photo on. I think the part that was like more concerning is like someone did like a comparison of the customer reviews and like the way they were written and was like, this is clearly AI, like they use the same model to spit these all out. I obviously have no way of knowing if that's 100% true or not. I do think like the evidence was relatively convincing. And the other piece of it is a lot of these AI generated images, I'm literally looking at it right now, it looks like it's like a Black mom, an Asian family, an ethnically ambiguous woman. Like they're clearly going out of their way to make it like very racially diverse, which normally it maybe wouldn't matter a ton if it's like you AI generate an image of a Black woman when it was actually like a white woman whose embryo you tested. But because the confidence levels in like non-white embryos is so much lower, people are like, oh, this is false advertising. And I understand the argument. I would say I agree.
Yeah. Also, like, false advertising is illegal. Like, it's not something that you can do. Like, even if you think about in the fintech world, like, there's companies that have gotten sued for false advertising and have to pay the SEC because you're not allowed to do that. And I feel like I would put what they're doing very much into that category of false advertising as well. Like, sure, if you're generating some stock photo to like put as like, listen to our customers or whatever, but if you're actually generating like AI images of customers that have reviewed your product and you know you have all that information, you should be like relatively accurate.
Yeah, and like in his defense, he was like, we'll put a note that they're like AI generated and like we should have been more transparent, which is like a first step. But like I think there's like a bigger issue of like, I don't know, like their ethnicities and stuff too.
Yeah. No. Would you guys use Nucleus Genomics?
Honestly, no. Like I think after going through all of the blogs like in depth, I would use probably a competitor, and I would use it like as of right now if I had to do it today. I don't know what it'll look like in like 5 years when we're having a kid.
Oh my God, that's so soon.
Or 10 years, I don't know. I would just look at what's it called, like the traits where there's like relatively high confidence. Like if IQ is like actually noise and that's what scientists are saying, I don't want to see that because that would influence my decision.
You. Yeah.
I'm not going to pick the embryo with a lower IQ.
Yeah, but I feel like, to me, after reading all of this, it's not clear that any competitor has like a truly outstanding product.
Oh, like the only reason I'd go with a competitor is because like I have some like concerns about their like due diligence in the way they approach things, which like those mistakes, like sloppy mistakes, translate into your product and into everything, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I'd use a competitor, but I wouldn't look at IQ at a competitor with a competitor either. I'd look at like cystic fibrosis, Down syndrome. There's other ones too. Like I think there are some that are like I'd look at like cutting edge ones, but not like just like straight up like eye color. Like, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like.
So I thought about this because I was like, oh, what can they say about their customer reviews? And like eye color is like one of the few that they, like someone can actually comment on, because a lot of these things happen down the line, right? So like a customer review of being like, oh yeah, like I had a beautiful baby.
The babies in the customer reviews of these AI generated images were not even born when this product was created. And then Nucleus Genomics was like, oh, they were in like a beta version. And then they were like, oh, but like, didn't it come out that your beta version was like basically all noise and like didn't work? So what is it? Like either you gave a product that doesn't work to like many customers, or you.
But that like is a beta version. Like I feel like that's fair.
No, like I don't.
Especially if you're not charging.
I don't think you can like sell a healthcare product that has like no. You have to prove in a study that's like conducted reasonably well that you're actually showing something. Like I can't just wake up tomorrow and be like, I'm going to sell like DNA tests and then have like no evidence that it works.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's the question. But yeah, I don't know. We kind of already said that, but yeah. I guess like I don't see the beta version of an app the same way I see the beta version of like a healthcare product.
That's valid.
Yeah. Cool. I guess we were wrong about predicting Nucleus Genomics a few months back, but we're here to correct our mistakes.
It still is cool though. Like I think like in general, the idea of it is cool, and if they can get their technology there, it'd be cool.
I've asked him to interview him like 3 times, so if he ever sees this, he's probably gonna be like, "What's wrong with this chick that's in my LinkedIn DMs?" and then discussing the controversies on her podcast. But I have no idea who she is. Anyways, it's fine.
Okay, we can clear the air, Kian. Bye.